You know Thanksgiving, but do you know the difference between first Thanksgiving and the first American Thanksgiving? Well, of course, in 1620, when the Pilgrims landed in a forest much like this on the east coast of the United States, before they got off the ship, they all signed the Mayflower Compact, which said they would all band together for self-defense, and also they would rule themselves. They would set their own laws and their own judges, their own rules, their own fines, all of that. So there would be a self-governing body that would band together, right? And that first winter was brutal, brutal. In fact, half of the people who were on the boat starved to death. And when spring finally came, they were so rejoicing that the fields came to life and they were able to plant things and they were able to grow some Indian corn, and they were able to find game in the forest. And they had such abundance by the end of that first year, by the fall, they had a huge party and they invited their neighbors, and they called it Thanksgiving, after the tradition that they'd brought from the old world into the new world. And it was great. The Indians brought wild game, and the Pilgrims had a bunch of corn that they'd grown and other things that they'd grown, and they celebrated and they chowed down and they feasted for 3 days. There were no tables, no silverware. It was like a Boy Scout camp for 3 days. And then the winter came again, and it was just as cold and just as brutal, and not as many people suffered and died, but they still suffered and died. So in 1622, they rejoiced when the summertime came, and they gathered and they hunted and they grew, and everybody put what they made and got into a big pile, and then people would take what they needed and what they wanted out of that pile. And that's how they operated things. But then the winter came again, and it was terrible, terrible, terrible. So they gathered together, those same people who signed the compact, at least those who were left, who hadn't starved to death by now. They got together and they said, we like the compact, we're gonna make our own laws and rules, and we're gonna have to change something. And after a great debate and lots of thises and that's and yeses and nos, they came to the conclusion and the decision that they would no longer work communally, but they would each, according to their family, be assigned a plot of land, and they would own that land, and they would own what that land produced, and they would own their own labor. The next day, men who had been sick on their sick bed, being nursed to health by their good neighbors, left their sick beds and went to their private land to prepare for spring. The ladies who had been watching the children took the children out of the warm of the huts that they'd built onto their land and prepared it for spring. They took their kids with them. No more entertaining their kids inside. Now their kids had jobs to do on the farm. And by the time spring came, the lands were ready and they were productive. And then when fall came again, they had another Thanksgiving, and they had abundance unimagined the last few years. So much was there. They had a big party, and everybody brought stuff for this big party. That was 1623, and that was the first American Thanksgiving, where they decided they're going to have private property, they're going to have free exchange, and they're going to keep what they made. And still, they were great neighbors. They loved each other. They would nurse each other back to health when they needed it. They would band together for common defense, but they had their own private property. This worked so well that the Pilgrims expanded and expanded, and they passed down that tradition to the founding of the nation. And even till today, it is our responsibility to take care of ourselves and our families. The community will band together when we need it, but it's our responsibility to take responsibility for ourselves. And this is how the heroes of the past can help us with our problems today.